All right, let's go ahead and get started here. We've got a lot of text to get through tonight, so I'll pray for the Lord's help. Dear God, we are humbled as we come before you and see our need. Lord, I see my need as a teacher, so help me tonight to be clear and thorough and helpful with this text. And Lord, I pray that everyone in this room would be helped by your word, that you would use your spirit to bring illumination to it, that you would work on our hearts too and reveal our own failures, our own fears to us, and help us to see where we need to trust in you and depend upon you and not to do things in our own strength. So we pray this in your name. Amen. All right. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Kyle.
Hey, you're here. I hope everyone has a handout. I do not have slides with a cool map because I was working on a cool map and I'm not Bill Cross and I messed it up and the whole thing deleted and it's gone. But never fear. There'll probably be a map next week. But I did put one on the board, which is just as good. It's just as good. Yeah. No,
That actually looks like a map.
We actually had to zoom out a little bit. So, all right. So tonight we're going to be in Judges 6, 7, and 8. So that is a lot of text. We're going to be moving quickly, kind of getting big ideas, pausing, and hopefully seeing some important questions that we should be asking ourselves. But we're going to just start right there with a little bit of review on your sheet. So we're studying the book of Judges. The book of Judges has this theme, this theme idea that everyone will do what is right in their own eyes. They'll reveal their own hearts before God, and that's almost what the whole book is about, is to show us what the human heart is like without God and its need for God's grace. And so what is our big idea for the book of Judges? God's fallen people need God's grace to give a right king to rule over our wayward, wandering hearts. And we've been seeing that the past few weeks. Really kind of this void of leadership, those that are having to step into leadership and their weaknesses. We're going to see that again tonight with our man Gideon here. But what's caused all of these problems in the land of Canaan? It's an idea that we had from the first week there. It's that first blank there. What went wrong? What happened?
The Israelites did not kill all of the Canaanites.
Yeah.
They didn't obey God.
Yeah, okay, so they didn't obey God, right? God gave them this clear command to drive out. He even promised, I'll drive these out before you, these peoples out before you. And they did not do that, right? And so there was a mission failure. That's your blank there, a mission failure. And with that mission failure, that's outlined in the beginning of the book of Judges, right? That they didn't accomplish what they were supposed to. It kind of reiterates over and over and over again where they failed. And in fact, how they failed in not driving them out by enslaving these people and keeping them right in their own homes. And even we get accounts that, hey, they've been even driven out. The Israelites have even been driven out of their appointed promised land home, right? There's places where they've been driven back. And that's how the book of Judges starts. And it really only gets worse from there. And so that's what we've been seeing. I thought this quote was helpful a few weeks ago, and it still is helpful today. A people who fails to give God, or give their wholehearted obedience to God, can only sink lower and lower. And so that's what we see in the book of Judges. The book of Judges is building into this story and narrative in the Old Testament that's leading up to where we get a king in 1 Samuel. And so one big narrative role the book of Judges has in the Old Testament is to reveal this problem: there is no king. Okay, so that's your next blank there. There is no king in Israel. And in fact, today, Gideon is going to step in the role and do some king things. And he's not going to do a good job. He's going to do some king things. He's going to do some priest things. And both times he's going to really be showing we need somebody better who can actually do this for real. All right, so what is our pattern for the book of Judges? I have it there on your sheet there. Israel forgets God. So what does that mean? What does it mean to forget God? Okay, yeah, so they know that God said something, but then they act as if it's not there, right? So the program's on the computer, they're just not running it. They're choosing not to run it. They don't want to go and see what God has said. And so they forget God, and then what happens? Yeah. Yeah, those pagans that they didn't drive out of their land, those pagans actually teach them exactly how to worship idols that rebel against their God. And so that's what happens. And then what happens? Yeah, and how does God bring about this punishment or this discipline?
By those people that didn't drive out.
Yeah, almost all the time it's by the people that they didn't drive out. God brings them up against them. God brings other outside nations into the promised land, and they oppress them in their own home, right? And they're disciplined, and they're in judgment for their idolatry. And then what happens? All right, and so we looked at that word cry out a few weeks ago. What's entailed with that word?
It didn't always indicate repentance.
Yeah, it doesn't always indicate repentance. It indicates being sorry, indicates being in a bad situation, crying out like this stinks. But we're not really always clued into, is this a good sorrow or just a pained, I'm unhappy in my situation sorrow? And yet God's gracious. And God hears the people's cries, and he has compassion on them, and he shows grace. And so what does God do? Yeah, he sends a deliverer, right? And so we have that fun word, judge, that you just go around at your workplace tomorrow and you said, I love judges. I love what the judges do in the Bible. People would be like, what are you talking about? What do they do? Are they just sitting in court? No. These are deliverers. These are saviors. These are God's chosen instruments to deliver his people from particular situations.
They leave no king's rallies,
right? Right. I don't know. I'm on video, so I'm not going to comment. So God sends a judge to deliver his people, and that judge brings what to the land? Peace, rest. All right, so that's been the pattern so far in Judges. That will continue to be the pattern. But after today, there is going to be no more rest as we go through the book of Judges. This cycle starts to deteriorate and fall apart, and ultimately, it's just going to be chaos at the end of the book of Judges. And so the land experienced rest as long as the judge is alive, as long as that judge is honoring God and leading people back to true worship. And so today, that's where we're going to start to question and go, like, does that actually really happen fully here with Gideon? And so judge dies, the cycle begins again. So that's what you have there for your blank. The judge dies. That's a constant refrain in the book of Judges. The judge dies. It gets to the point where you're like, wow, we need a deliverer who won't die. We need somebody that has an indestructible life. Okay, so what judges have we had so far? And what's stood out to you guys going through the book of Judges so far?
Othniel from the tribe of Judah.
All right, so Othniel from the tribe of Judah. What was special about Othniel?
Set the type or the pattern for a good judge.
Yeah, he was kind of the golden boy. He didn't have any weaknesses played on. It was kind of really the archetype, the paradigm. It was just a clean-cut story of a judge delivering Israel, right? No problems, success, all that. Why was there probably more success with Othniel than for any of the other judges that we're going to get? What tribe was Othniel from? Judah, yeah. And so Judah, right, is where who is going to come from? Yeah, the real king. So the closer you are to Judah, the better it is. The further away, the worse it gets. What are some of the other judges that we had? What was the one after Othniel? Ehud. Okay, so Ehud, what was surprising about him?
He's left-handed.
Yeah, left-handed. I mean, a little bit of operated in the gray areas. Had a hidden sword, assassinated the evil king there, and pretty gory details. But he helped the people return back to God, right? They worshiped God, they followed God while he was alive. Who was another judge mentioned in just one verse? Shamgar. All right, well, I mean, there's not that much there, but what was special about Shamgar?
He's not Israelite.
Okay, yeah, he probably isn't an Israelite, and we know that from his name. It wasn't necessarily a Hebrew name. Yeah, and he had this ox goad. It was pretty scary. One verse. That's all we get. All right, what else? What other judges have we had? This was last week. All right, so short story. Like who was Barak? Who was Deborah? What was going on there? So I know I have prayer class people in here that haven't been here for any book of Judges, but
Well, the men of Baal said Deborah stepped up and she was a prophet. She was a prophet.
yeah,
She told Barak what he really needed to do. He kind of reluctantly did it, but it worked out where she told him the right thing.
yeah.
He
And so,
exercised faith even though he was kind of
Yeah.
maybe scared.
yeah, and he exercised faith, and there was victory. But we're getting hints that things are a little upside down in Israel, right? It's not necessarily all the way that it should be in God's good design. And yet God's gracious, and he's working through it. He's providing deliverance. We have a whole song in chapter 5 there of God's deliverance. And that brings us to chapter 6 and our big idea for tonight. God is gracious to fearful, faltering, fallen people, just like you, me, and Gideon. God is gracious. God is gracious. And so we're going to have to kind of zoom our way through the text. We're going to see kind of some of the similar themes that we've seen repeated already in the book of Judges. We'll note those as we come up to them. But we're being introduced to this guy named Gideon, okay? And even before we get to Gideon, we got to think a little bit about him, okay? So we're going to see, and this is things I want you to see tonight as we're going. This guy, he's conflicted, okay? If you wanted to pick a guy that's riding a roller coaster of emotions, Gideon is that guy, okay? He's fearful at times, he's confident at times, he's arrogant at times, he's humble at times. He has desperation at times. He's avenging and compromising. And yet, at the end of these chapters, which hopefully we'll get to tonight, we see that there's still rest for the land. And even if we go to the book of Hebrews, Gideon is one of the men that's in there, that's mentioned in the Hall of Faith. And he's in one sense put forward as an example of faith. Maybe weak and fearful as it is. I mean, he's an example there. And so we're just going to have to see this up and down type of guy and try to understand that and try to see ourselves in that too. This is also going to be the first time that sin and idolatry really start to creep back into the cycle even during that period of rest. All right, so this is kind of the beginning of the end. This is a turning point in the book of Judges. And so from this point forward, in the weeks to come, the judges are going to be much more dominated by their weaknesses than their strengths. Okay, that's what we're going to see going forward. And even the situations that our judges get themselves into, or that God shows us in the text, they become much more sinful and sticky and complex. And you're not really sure what they should have done because it was all bad. Everything that they did was bad, that kind of stuff. And so, to keep in mind this, especially for these few chapters and going forward, judges and their standing before God and their failures and their strengths and weaknesses, they're really representing where all of the people of God are as we go forward. So they're a representation and reflection of the rest of the people. And so Gideon even kind of shows that today. All right, so verses 1 through 6. Verses 1 through 6. We have, your big blank up there. A faithless people and a fearful judge. Faithless people and a fearful judge. So verses 1 through 6, the cycle begins. Okay, so we have, I'll just read those 6 verses. Actually, why don't I have some volunteers to read? Jack, would you mind reading verses 1 through 6?
Sure. Then the sons of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hands of the Midians 7 years. And the power of Midian prevailed against Israel. Because of Midian, the sons of Israel made for themselves the dens which were in the mountains, and the caves, and the strongholds. For it was when Israel had sown that the Midianites would come up with the Amalekites and the sons of the east, and go against them. So they would camp against them and destroy the produce of the earth as far as Gaza, and leave no sustenance in Israel as well as no sheep, ox, or donkey. For they would come up with their livestock in their tents. They would come in like locusts for number. Both they and their camels were innumerable, and they came into the land to devastate it. So Israel was brought very low because of Midian, and the sons of Israel cried to the Lord.
Thanks, Jack. So, we start there, verse 1. Right, this is kind of our big transition statement between these judges. Then the sons of Israel did what was evil in the eyes of Yahweh. And so every time we see that phrase, we're kind of embarking into a new era in the book of Judges. And it's almost always going to be a worse era. And so doing what was evil, right? They're falling into the practices, the worship, the idolatry, the Baals, the Ashtaroth, all of that they were supposed to have taken out. And so that's the reality. That's what we're going to see the reality is for Gideon and his family. And God, right, is sovereign in all of this, and he gives them over, right? He delivers them over, hands them over to these peoples. So the Midianites and the Amalekites, and even the peoples of the east. And so where are these places? Midian is down way south of, this is kind of the area of Palestine, Israel right here. And down south is where Midian is. And so these people were nomadic peoples, kind of, or at least they would travel along these kind of big passageways with their livestock, with their animals. They're kind of, in that sense, tent dwellers. And they would be traveling up through here. And over here, you have the Fertile Crescent. You have a lot of nice, lush areas to go, but you also have a lot of scary peoples over there. And so if there's a power vacuum over here, especially when we looked at kind of the valleys that we were looking at last week and all of the rain and the fertile soil and all that kind of stuff, the Midianites would take along some pals, the Amalekites who were living kind of where Edom is. These are descendants of Esau. And they would come up this way and go cross right over the Jordan and just take over the land of Israel. And the way that they're described, it's like a locust plague is coming in and just destroying and eating everything. In fact, that's how they're counted off as a numbered plague, a crowd of locusts. They were like locusts in verse 5. And they come in and they eat everything that the Israelites had planted, right? So all the crops, all of the cultivation that they're trying to do, they come in, they eat it all, they let their animals just graze on it and eat it all, and they just wipe out everything that Israel would be depending upon for their normal year's worth of food. And not only that, they're taking all the livestock that Israel depends upon, not just for food, but also just to do farming, and they're taking all of that and killing all of that and eating all of those animals. And so they're just basically wrecking the economic ability for Israel to be able to provide for itself, all of the food stores, all of this, to the point that when Midian shows up in Israel, this is kind of a cycle, that they just kind of show up, kind of leave for part of the year, and then they go back and they come back kind of thing. When they show up Israel, they're going to the caves. They're going to the mountains. They're finding hiding holes in the rocks. They're just leaving. And they're just saying, yeah, take my farm, take my animals. I'm just going to get out of here. And it's only been 7 years. So in that sense, not the longest period of oppression in the book of Judges. But it seems to be just so thorough. Right? This isn't in any sense like an enslavement where they're just there and they're just kind of taxing and taking resources off the top. Like this is everything that Israel has. And so, Israel, they can't really handle it. They're scrounging for food. They're always on the run. We're going to see Gideon and how he's even like having to live and make a way for him to have food and the way he does that in just a bit. But the oppressors, they're living off the bounty of Israel. So if you are opening your Bible there, turn to Deuteronomy chapter 28. Chapter 28, and we'll look at verses 29 through 31. Let me get there too. All right, so chapter 28, verses 29. Is that the right reference? Yeah. And so it's basically talking about what's going to happen when these invaders come in because you've disobeyed and you've pursued these other grounds. What are the curses that are going to come about? In verse 29, you'll grope at noon as the blind man gropes in darkness, and you will not succeed in your ways, but you shall only be oppressed and robbed all your days, with none to save you. Right? And it gets worse, right? You shall betroth the wife, but another man shall violate her. You shall build a house, but you will not live in it. You shall plant a vineyard, but you will not use its fruit. Your ox shall be slaughtered before your eyes, but you will not eat of it. Your donkey shall be torn away from you and will not be returned to you. Your sheep shall be given to your enemies, and you will have none to save you. All right, that is the reality for the Israelites in Judges chapter 6. That's what's happening to them. And that reality of like we have no one to save us, whether that means that they're repentant or not, that's why they are crying out to the Lord, verse 6. So they're brought very low, and the sons of Israel cried out to Yahweh. And so good or bad, we don't necessarily know. But what happens? Does God send them help? Well, not exactly, not yet. 7 through 10, heart check instead of deliverance. That's kind of the question that's being thrown out here. So verse 7, now it happened when the sons of Israel cried out to Yahweh on account of Midian, that Yahweh sent a prophet, not a judge, not a deliverer yet. He sent a prophet to the sons of Israel and said to them, thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel, it was I who brought you up from Egypt and brought you out from the house of slavery. I delivered you from the hands of the Egyptians and from the hands of all your oppressors and drove them out before you and gave you their land. And I said to you, I am your God. You shall not fear the God of the Amorites in whose land you live, but you have not listened to my voice. Dun, 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 dun. Right? It kind of is ominous there. So God sends them a prophet rather than a deliverer. I thought this illustration was pretty good from one of the commentators. This is like a stranded motorist calling a car garage for assistance, and the garage sending a philosopher instead of a mechanic. Right? Like if you're those people and you're crying out like we need help. This is awful. This stinks. And then this guy just comes up with some words to say. We're like, that is not the help that I was expecting or wanting. And I think even the way that it ends, verse 10, just kind of ominously, it kind of means that prophet, in one sense, wasn't well received. But what is God doing here? Well, at the very least, he's trying to show his people that they need their hearts checked before, or even more than they need their circumstances changed. Okay, they need to know why they're in this situation. Right? That's what the prophet goes to tell them. That you have a God who delivers you, and you have a God who's called you to not go to these idols and to worship him. And so the question is, are you? And I think that the implication is like, no, they don't get this yet. They still don't get this. And yet God is gracious to send them this. And so, yeah, sometimes we need understanding more than relief in our situations. And so even thinking for our own lives, when do you merely want to escape your circumstances rather than interpreting your circumstances the way God wants you to? Right? God works stuff in our lives all the time. I don't know if it's going to be Midianites oppressing you and you're living in a cave, but he does bring stuff in your life, and so often we want out. Even in a godly way, we want out. And God, I think, often brings that type of stuff into our lives to ask us questions about where we are with him and how we're trusting him and what we think of his promises and how are we loving others in this situation, all that kind of stuff. And so even this little blurb here in Judges 6, I think, is a helpful reminder for us and what God does in his sovereignty. And he can say all those same things about you. Right? I'm the God that brought you out of death into life. Right? I'm the God that saves you. I'm the God that calls you to worship me, not turn back to that idolatry, to those desires of your past. I called you to that. So what are you doing, right, Kyle? What are you doing, Kyle? That's the way that God reaches out to us. Okay, but it ends there in verse 10 on this cliffhanger. Throughout the rest of the Old Testament, this indictment where God says, I am your God, right? Thus is the Lord from a voice of a prophet. I am your God. Right? I've delivered you from these things. I've told you not to do this thing. You have not listened to my voice, and so judgment. Right? That's how almost all of these passages are going to go in the prophets, in Isaiah and Jeremiah and the minor prophets. Like, in fact, that's a pattern. That's a type. That's what we expect in Hebrew to even see there. It cuts off in verse 10 in such a surprising way that I think we're having to be confronted with God's grace. Right? So these people who are receiving the book of Judges and the original audience have to see this and go, yeah, they should be facing more judgment, and yet God doesn't give that to them. God doesn't discipline them. God shows them grace here. That's amazing. They don't deserve it. I think that's exactly what the author is trying to do. Because we now get to verses 11 through 24, where we have God's promised presence for a people that have abandoned him and denied him and hated him and run after these other gods. God still promises his presence. And so how do we see this? Well, we're introduced to Gideon. Then the angel of Yahweh, so verse 11 there, came and sat under the oak that was in Ophrah. Now, why are all these people sitting under trees? Yeah, I have no idea either. But anyways, there's a lot of trees. Sat under the oak that was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, as his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress in order to preserve it from the Midianites. All right, so we just got to pause there because, first, probably most of you guys don't have a winepress. Most of you guys don't go out there and thresh your own wheat. So what is going on? What stands out to the people that are reading this, the original audience, and what are we not getting? A winepress has to be low. Right? It has to be down low. It has to be either down a hill. It often is at the base of a hill because you're crushing grapes and you're having the juice flow down and flow down and flow down until you're getting it and collecting it at the bottom of the wine press down there. So by nature, it's going to be in some sort of cleft in the rock. It's going to be some sort of bottom of the valley, some sort of secluded, private, not as visible place. Right? That's how you would make wine and get juice from grapes. The way that you would thresh wheat is the exact opposite. You want to be in a place that actually has a breeze, that's open, that's out in the public area or a visible area where you can throw up your wheat and the wheat grains can fall and the chaff can fly away. If you were threshing wheat in that way, you would be very visible. Right? That's the best place to thresh wheat. That's the best place to collect wheat and get grain and all that kind of stuff. But it'd be very visible. The Midianites would know exactly where you are, what you're doing, and they'd be like, oh, great, you already got it for us. Thank you. And they would come and take it from you. If you wanted to do this secretly, and you still wanted to have a nice place to collect it, you would go to a place like a wine press, unfortunately where there's probably no breeze, and so it's probably a lot harder to do this, and you'd be doing this in secret, maybe even in the dark, where it's a lot even harder to see what you're doing. And I think that's exactly how we are introduced to this guy named Gideon. Right? In one sense, he's operating in fear. He is not saying, you know what? I don't care about Midianites. I'm just going to go get bread for myself. No, he doesn't say that. Right? He starts out in this position of fear, of hiding, he's definitely trying to find food and make food, but he isn't coming across as this bold, brave guy. Okay? So then the angel of Yahweh, this is verse 12, appeared to him and said to him, Yahweh is with you, O mighty man of valor. And some of your translations might say, O mighty hero, right? O man of valor. It's meant to be a little ironic. Like Gideon's like, you mean me? Like that's exactly how it's supposed to come across. And so why is the angel of the Lord addressing Gideon this way? Well, it's doing a few things. I think it is setting this framework to say, like, this guy is a scaredy cat. He is afraid. He isn't going to be the brave, mighty judge that you want, like Othniel was, or Shamgar, or Ehud. This guy is not like that. And what's also, I think, being promised is God saying, I can make you a man of valor. I'm going to work through you. So I think both of those things are true here. But it's setting this trajectory where there's an irony, where you have this guy that's operating in fear being called something that he clearly is not yet, at least. And Gideon responds with really just skepticism and fear, and it kind of reveals where everyone is at in Israel at this point. Okay? So let me make sure I'm not missing anything here. Yeah, okay. So verse 13, when Gideon said to him, "O my Lord, if Yahweh is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his wondrous deeds which our fathers recounted to us, saying, did not Yahweh bring us up from Egypt? But now Yahweh has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." Like that is just taking stuff and twisting it and setting it down again, twisting it again, and coming out on the other side of it just being entirely bitter, skeptical, and showing exactly what it means when Israel forgets the Lord. All right? What does it mean? Well, they know who God is. They know what God has done, and yet they do not know what we read in Deuteronomy 28. Right? They aren't getting this fact that what is happening to us is because we have run away from our God and we have taken these other gods. They're not connecting that dot. That's showing in one sense the unbelief, the hardness of heart in Israel. That's why God sent that prophet to them to speak those words to them. But what else does Gideon say? He ends it by basically saying, God's abandoned us. Right? This is what's happened. God has abandoned us. He's forsaken us. He's given us into the hand of the Midianites. This shouldn't be a part of God's plan, but this is what it is. So that means we're outside of God's plan now. And Gideon obviously is still operating in his human flesh and his weakness. And really what he's done is he's just not understood who God is and what God is like when God makes a promise. Yeah, Jack?
He doesn't even know who he's talking to.
Yeah, well, yeah, we're going to get to that in a second, yeah.
It's ironic, though, that he would say all this to the God that is doing all this.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and he he doesn't understand what it is that God would make a promise, right? That Yahweh God, the covenant-keeping God, makes a promise to his people, and he is fully willing to say, well, God's abandoned me, God's forsaken me. Now, we might say, whoa, Gideon, you've crossed the line. I would never do that. The problem is that we absolutely do that too. In situations when we're despairing, and especially when we're despairing and they're like, all right, well, I got to take it to my own hands. God's not working with me here, or God's not helping me. We're just like Gideon. We're saying, God's forsaken me. I have to make my own way. I have to go thresh wheat in the winepress in fear. That's how I have to make it. God's forsaken us. And that's why even kind of the big idea is like we are like Gideon in so many ways. And we need to see how God's graciousness to Gideon is the same graciousness that he shows us in our failings and our fears. And we accuse God of such things. And so what does God say to him? How does Yahweh respond to this? Verse 14, then Yahweh turned to him and said, go in this strength of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Have I not sent you? Right, go in this strength of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. He's just being commanded to go. Who else in the Bible has been commanded to go? That maybe he's operating the same kind of... Yeah, Moses, right? Moses was also told, hey, go. Ironically, there's other things there too. But he was told go, and Moses was like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't think I'm with this God anymore, these people anymore. I can't speak God. Like, that's where Moses was at. Well, Gideon's in pretty much a similar place. And so he says, go, I'll be with you, right? This, have I not sent you? Verse 15, but he said to him, O Lord, with what shall I save Israel? Right? Like, just look at how weak and pathetic I am, God. Like, I am in the least of the clans of Manasseh, and I'm the youngest in my father's house. Like, you got the wrong guy. That's what he's saying. And so he's looking for excuses. God said, I will send you. And he's like, nah, you got the wrong guy, God. But Yahweh said to him, surely I will be with you, and you shall strike down Midian as one man. Right? God shows incredible patience here with Gideon. Right? Gideon is being told directly like what to go do, and he's like getting out of it on every side of it. He's trying to make excuses. And God doesn't say, shut up and do what I'm telling you to do. Like, he gives them this promise, like, I am with you. Like, that is what should give you strength and hope. Like, that presence that God says, I will be with you, is incredible. And it's showing God's grace and kindness to someone who has not been following God, who's directly just accused God of forsaking them, and is still walking in unbelief in that sense. And so Gideon said to him, of course, I'll do it. No, he didn't. Gideon said to him, if now I have found favor in your eyes, then do a sign for me that it is you who speak with me. He still doubts. He's still, in one sense, testing God. And God accommodates his weakness. God is gracious and shows that he's going to walk with his people, walk with Gideon, even in that sense when Gideon doesn't deserve it. And so he says, please do not depart from here until I come back to you and bring out my offering and lay it before you. And he said, I will remain until you return. And so Gideon goes, he gets some food, he gets a goat, he gets some bread, he brings it back. And I don't know exactly what his plan was in this test, but the angel of God, verse 20, said to him, take the meat and the unleavened bread and lay them out on this rock and pour out the broth. And he did so. Then the angel of Yahweh put out the end of the staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened bread. And fire sprang up from the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread. Then the angel of Yahweh went away from before his eyes. And Gideon was immensely comforted. No. In fact, Gideon stays scared. So the thing that he was really wanting to be shown, proven, like by this test to show that God, this is actually God saying this, He's then terrified. And so Gideon saw that he was the angel of Yahweh. And so he said, Alas, O Lord Yahweh, for now I have seen the angel of Yahweh face to face. As in, like, I am going to die now. Right? There's fear, there's terror, there's fear on the other side of this. And Yahweh is still gracious to him, still kind to him, still comforting him. And he says, Peace to you, do not fear, you shall not die. And so, what's going on there? Well, I think something for us, and I thought this quote was really helpful. The way we think about our relationship with God, if we were to talk with God or encounter God, like we almost kind of have an expectation of, like, of course, right? I would do that. I should do that. I would be in that situation, and I would totally respond in a way that would be normal and natural and not afraid. And the way that this guy said it, he says, we think that intimacy with God is an inalienable right rather than an indescribable gift. That can be our default. There is nothing amazing about grace, he goes on, as long as there is nothing fearful about holiness. And so what Gideon really realized right there was, oh, I was just before Yahweh God, like the God that is the consuming fire, right? The God that with his voice, right, he created the earth and everything that's in it. Right? The God that just smote Egypt as they were pursuing Israel. That God. That's the God that I was just back-mouthing. And so that's, in one sense, where his fear comes in. And so in one sense, I think it's good there that he does fear. And yet God comforts him and in one sense is with him. And so how does Gideon respond to this? Gideon built an altar there to Yahweh and named it Yahweh is Peace. And to this day it is still an Ophrah of the Abiezrites. All right, so Gideon, that's really the first step of faith that he's taken in building that altar. All right, so now let's move on to our next section here. Preparing a fearful judge for God's mission. Preparing a fearful judge for God's mission. The problem is that Gideon is operating in a world of compromised people. Right? His family has altars and worships Baal and has, in one sense, even set this up right in their own center of their city, of their town. And God is not going to take Gideon and just start doing judge stuff with him until Gideon's own house, in one sense, is in order. And so that's what we have there, verses 25 through 32, removing the compromises. Removing the compromises. Verse 25. Now it happened on the same night that Yahweh said to him, Take your father's bull and a second bull 7 years old, and pull down the altar of Baal, which belongs to your father, and cut down the Asherah that is beside it. And build an altar to Yahweh your God on top of this stronghold in an orderly manner, and take the second bull and offer a burnt offering with the wood of the Asherah, which you shall cut down. Now, this is really the start of Gideon's judgeship, of his deliverance, of his walking in faith towards God. And God basically has this same principle that we see in Matthew 6:24, right? You can't be a slave to two masters. You can't say you're going to follow God here and build an altar to God here and have an altar of Baal over here. Like, that was not going to work for God's deliverer. And so God calls Gideon directly to go take down these idol worship things right in your own town. Now, Gideon doesn't respond, in one sense, in this victorious strength and bravery and just goes out there in broad daylight and just starts tearing it down. Now, what's Gideon's MO here? Yeah, he's afraid. Okay. So what happened? So Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as Yahweh had spoken to him. Now it happened that because he was too afraid of his father's household and the men of the city to do it by day, he did it by night. And so we see that Gideon, like he's obeying, right? In one sense, we can't say that he doesn't obey. He's obeying, and that is actually what is more important, right? Obedience is essential. Like being a hero is optional in that sense. And yet, right, this is still just showing us where Gideon's heart is before all this and who he's really afraid of. In fact, in one sense, he does it so that no one would know who did it. Now, there's a little bit of irony here in the Hebrew. Gideon's name kind of means like someone who hews wood, right? That word, I don't know why all the lexicons have hew instead of cuts wood or chops wood, but hews wood. And the irony a little bit is that, sorry, let me actually read the exact thing of what is ironic about that. Is that that's exactly what he has to do to this Asherah, right? So the lumberjack, the hewer, is going to go hew the Asherah down, and then everyone's like, who did it? It's like, oh, maybe it's the guy who hews things down. That's kind of the idea there. The hewer, right? They said Gideon, the son of Joash, did this thing in verse 29. And so verse 28, the men of the city, they arise early in the morning, and they are outraged, right? Who did this? Right? They are pretty committed to their sin, right? They love their sin, and they come out and they're like, who did this? This person has to die. And Gideon does not go up there and volunteer himself. Right? He stays hidden. He stays in the background. In fact, in one sense, it seems almost like he's hiding behind his dad. And they're like, so who did it? They find out, oh, it was the hewer, Gideon, the son of Joash. He did this thing. And then the men of the city said to Joash, bring out your son that he may die, for he has torn down the altar of Baal, and indeed he has cut down the Asherah which is beside it. And here is where we start to see Gideon the judge starting to have the delivering, saving, transforming impact on God's people. Because Joash, he doesn't say, you're right, he shouldn't have done that. Joash, by all accounts, was definitely worshiping this at this altar and worshiping that Baal and all of that stuff. But Joash, he actually gets a spark in there. And some of the truth of who God is comes out in what Joash says. And he has some courage. And he stands up and he says, will you contend for Baal or will you save him? Whoever will contend for him shall be put to death by morning. If he is a god, let him contend for himself because someone has torn down his altar. That is like, Baal, if Baal's a real god, he's going to get the justice he should get out of this. Like, we don't need to do anything for him. That's kind of what he's saying. But in an ironic way. As in, we know who the real God is, and Baal is not that one. And so, Gideon's example, Gideon's actions there, it does start to turn at least one man's heart in Israel back to who the true God is and against the false gods. And so, Gideon's name from that day onward is Jerubbaal, or the one who contends with Baal. And so he gets that name going forward, and we'll see that referenced a few other times. Okay. Verses 33 through 35, setting the stage. So we've cleared out the compromises. We've worked on our home life. We have to start figuring out what is happening in the greater Israel. What's happening in this valley up here? Where are all these things happening? Now all the Midianites, so verse 33, now all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the sons of the east assembled themselves, and they crossed over and camped in the valley of Jezreel. So all these people, I should get a different color here. All these people, they're kind of doing their annual pilgrimage into the breadbasket up here, Jezreel, right? Kind of south and west of the Sea of Galilee. And they're going in there to take all of the food. This is what they do every year. Everyone is expecting it. That's maybe even why Gideon was kind of getting that grain put together, because they knew that these people were coming. And so they crossed over the Jordan, and they camped out in the heart of Israel. Verse 34, but the Spirit of Yahweh clothed Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, and I hate that word. That's a hard word. Abiezrites were called together to follow him. And he sent messengers throughout Manasseh, and they also were called together to follow him. And he sent messengers to Asher and Zebulun and Naphtali, and they came up to meet them. Okay. So, what does the Spirit do to Gideon? This is from a few weeks ago. Does it come into him? Or does it do something else? It comes upon him. Okay, so again, as we see the Holy Spirit working in the Old Testament, this is how the Holy Spirit works. It comes upon people. It doesn't enter people. Entering people and dwelling within them, that's New Covenant. Coming upon them and working in this way, that's what we see in the Old Testament under the Old Covenant. And so, Holy Spirit comes upon Gideon, or clothes Gideon, and he starts doing judge things, deliver things. He blows the trumpet, calls the people, come on out with me, we're going to go deal with these people. And once he's following the pattern that we've already had with Othniel and Ehud and Barak and Deborah. Like, this is the pattern. This is what we're going to do when we have one of these judges. We're going to get these people out of there. And then Gideon, the other side of Gideon, shows up. Okay? The time has come for battle, sort of. He's gathered all these men, and it's not yet time, because he's going to be testing God, verses 36 through 40. Testing God. Now, this is probably the one passage that everyone knows about Gideon. Okay, and there's whole theologies built off of this passage that are probably not right. Gideon's already been told by God to do what? Yeah, to go. I'm going to go with you, like drive out these Midianites. So, in one sense, is Gideon supposed to be confused about what he's supposed to do? No. Okay, so we have to keep that in mind. God's already said, I am with you. I'm going to go with you. And God doesn't tell Gideon to go consult the priests and the Urim and Thummim and all that kind of stuff. And he doesn't tell them to do that either. Or tell them to do that. And so Gideon, verse 36 said, so then Gideon said to God, if you will save Israel by my hand, as you have spoken. He says if to God, after God already told him exactly what he was supposed to go do, and that God was going to be with him. He says if. So what do you mean by if, Gideon? So I think right now, everything going forward, we have to say Gideon is operating in faltering faith. He believes in God, he's trusting in God, but he's also testing God. And this is not, in one sense, an example to follow. Okay, it's not an example to follow. We're seeing a description of what happens here. It's not a prescription for what we're supposed to do as Christians. And so he still has doubts, and so he's going to do his own testing thing. He's not going to put his hand into the ephod of the priest and pull out which rock it is, which stone it is, right? He's not doing that. He's going to do his own test and says, I'm going to put a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there's dew in the fleece only and it's dry on the ground, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand as you have spoken. And it was so. God is gracious to him. God hears him and meets him where he's at and answers his need. And Gideon, that's not enough. Right? Gideon's still afraid. He's still uncertain. And so he does it again. And I think Gideon knows exactly what he's doing. He sees that this is dangerous, like that he shouldn't be doing this. Verse 39, do not let your anger burn against me, that I may speak once more. Please let me make a test once more with the fleece. Let it now be dry only on the fleece, and let there be dew all on the ground. And that's probably even more impressive. And God did so that night. So it was dry only on the fleece, but dew was all on the ground. All right, so God is gracious to Gideon. Gideon is trying to discern the will of God that God has already made known to him. And God's like, yep, it's still the same thing. Now, how do we do this? I think the example that comes to my mind because it was me, is the college student just like agonizing about everything in life and what should I do? I don't know, and I'm just so, But it's like, no, dude, you have a paper that's due on Tuesday. That's what you're supposed to do. That is God's will. God has put that before you. Do that, right? Figuring out all these other things in life, yes, like we need to figure those out too, eventually in God's timing. But God has made very clear to you His will for you by putting you in this history class to do good before the Lord, to honor Him with what you're supposed to do. So get your paper done, right? That I think is kind of, not exactly the same thing, but kind of where Gideon is at. Where it's like, this is right before you, Gideon. This is what God's told you to do. You've gathered these people. Go do it. And you're like, I don't know what God's will is. And it's like, well, no, it's right here in front of you. And so we can absolutely agonize over trying to understand God's will. We could even foolishly concoct tests for God and say, oh, if God does this, then I know it's this thing. Or if God does this, then I know it's that thing. And yet so often God's will for us is very clear in the simple things that He's put before us in life. And for the moments when it's really confusing and uncertain, like that's where we have God's word. That's where we have wisdom that we can go in and find the principles that are here and live out that wisdom to the best of our ability in honoring God and taking counsel from wise believers and just honoring God by taking those steps at a time in that sense. Instead of saying, you know what, I'm going to just throw this resume out the window and just trust that somebody will pick it up and give me a job. Right? That's could God do that? Yes. Should God work that way for everyone? No, God doesn't work that way for everyone. He doesn't call us to do that. And so we need to be careful with this passage to not have those fleece-like moments, because I don't think Gideon's operating in a position of strength and obedience here. And yet, we still see God's graciousness to him. And so that is also what is important. God is gracious to us even when we fail and falter in unbelief. Okay, so what happens? Yahweh's deliverance by his by his fearful warrior. I had the wrong things on there. God's victory by his fearful warrior. All right, so Gideon, he's been afraid the entire time. Right? He's been not trusting God in all these little glimpses. And yet, he's still been dragged along in one sense by God, empowered by God, and helped by God, been shown so much grace by God. And God is saying, all right, it is time now. Like, we are going to do what I told you to do, what my will has been so clearly expressed to do. We're going to drive out the Midianites now. And so Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, verse 1 of chapter 7, and all the people who were with him rose early and camped beside the spring of Harod, and the camp of Midian was on the north side of them by the hill of Morah in the valley. So this is where I wish I had a really awesome map, but I don't. All right, so this right here is a valley. So this is low fertile land in between these two places. Okay? And over here, there's water that eventually goes that way, I believe. Why is it important that there's water? You'll see in a bit. All right. So, anyways, they're over here. This is where Gideon is with all of his buddies from the different surrounding tribes that are right here, but not all the tribes. Note that, not all the tribes, but the surrounding ones that he's called. And on the other side, kind of up on the edge of this little mountain over here, is all of the Midianites, and there's a whole bunch of them. Right? There's a whole bunch of them. So the north side of them by the hill of Morah in the valley is where those Midianites are. So verse 2, and Yahweh said to Gideon, the people who are with you are too many for me to give Midian into their hands, lest Israel honor themselves, saying, my own hand has saved me. So what are we seeing here in verses 1 through 8 of chapter 7? Weakness is necessary to display God's power. Weakness is necessary to display God's power. We've already seen this in Judges, right? We had Ehud, the left-handed guy, right? The unsuspecting, surprising, kind of almost like that guy kind of guy. We had Shamgar with just an ox goat, like wiping out a bunch of dudes. We had Deborah, really like the person that you're like, why You have a girl leading you guys? And she was, one sense, that unsuspecting weakness made great through God's display of power. Well, we have that again here, and God is going to spell it out exactly. Right? He says, here's the problem. There's too many of you, Gideon. I know you're scared. But in one sense, you're not scared enough. Because you're counting on your own strength here. And you're not counting on me. And so what I need you to do is not have that many people. Right? I don't want you guys to have any reason to boast in your victory. And so verse 3, so now come, call out in the hearing of the people, say, whoever is afraid and trembling, let him return and depart from Mount Gilead. And so he has about 32,000 people with him. And he says, all right, anybody that's scared can go home. And 22,000 people out of his army go home. Right? I mean, what'd you say? I know. I mean, from our standpoint, we're like, that's probably a good sign that we shouldn't be doing this right now. Yeah, no, they're exactly like Gideon. I'm sure maybe in one sense Gideon was like, oh, can I go with those guys? But they go, but 10,000 remain. And they're like, we're going to get these Midianites out of here. And there's a lot of Midianites. Right? There's a lot. We have a number later on. Like over 100,000 of them, at least. And so what's happening here? It seems like a good thing that people are showing faith. There's a big turnout to go kick out these Midianites. And God's like, no, that's still too many people, these 10,000 that are remaining. The people are still too many, verse 4. Bring them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. And it will be that he of whom I says to you, this one shall go with you, he shall go with you. But every one of whom I say to you, this one shall not go with you, he shall not go. So even though we're taking 10,000 people down to this area of water over here, this little creek, this little river thing, like 10,000 people. Like even if we parse that out, we're still going to bring a couple thousand with us, right? That's what you're thinking. So he brought the people down to the water, and Yahweh said to Gideon, everyone who laps the water with his tongue as a dog laps, you shall set him aside by himself, and so also everyone who kneels to drink. Now I thought about bringing a bowl of water and making one of you guys demonstrate what this looks like. But no, we don't have that. But just imagine, right? You know what a dog looks like. So I'm sure in one sense it looks like, wow, that's how you drink water? It's kind of the kid that puts his whole mouth on the water fountain. You're just like, ooh. And so there's only 300 guys that do this. So you go from 10,000 to 300. And really the point isn't that, like, well, these guys drunk water in a special way and that's showing something about their heart. That's not the point. It's just the way that God's choosing to whittle down this number to what we can clearly see is, in one sense, an incredible, impossible number, right? This little number of 300, that number is going to be the ones that are going to drive out the Midianites. And so 300, right, it's the sign of Israel's weakness. It's not the epitome of their strength. And so in that sense, weakness, it's necessary to display God's power here. There's a tendency in the hearts of everyone, right? Especially those who aren't trusting God, but even for those that trust God, to steal praise and glory from God. Right? And we have to always be watching out for that in our own hearts. That's why God brings many opportunities for us to be humbled and be reminded and have our 10,000 soldiers leave us with just 300. And so, just a question I have, like, how is God bringing you to weakness to show you that you need to stop relying on yourself and boasting in yourself? Like, how is God doing that? He might be doing it in a pretty painful way for you in the moment. And it's hard to pray for that to come into our lives, right? Like if you had 10,000 soldiers by your side or 32,000 soldiers by your side, you're not praying like, God, please take away all these soldiers that are about to need in battle. Like, you're not praying that in your own flesh. But God brings that along anyways. And so 300 men go off to fight the horde of thousands and thousands. So what's next for us? God's encouragement for the weak-hearted. All right, Gideon so far actually has been operating for him, in where he's been at, pretty much an astounding amount of courage. Right? He hasn't questioned God in any of this whittling down. And so,
He's in shock.
yeah, maybe. Exactly. He's just not sure exactly what's happening. And so we go from verses 9 through 15 here. What does God do? Well, God brings encouragement for Gideon. Right? He encourages Gideon. I think in this sense, like God knows that Gideon struggles with faithlessness and fear. God knows where Gideon's been at, and God initiates something to encourage and show Gideon that, no, you can trust me, Gideon. I am with you. I am for you. You don't have to test me. I'll show you myself. And so he says, go down and see this sign. Right, go down at night, for I've given it into your hands. But if you are afraid, verse 10, if you are afraid to go down, then both you and Purah, your young man, go down to the camp, and you will hear what they say, and afterward your hands will be strengthened, that you may go down against the camp. And so he went with Purah, his young man, because he was afraid, down to the outskirts of the armed men that were in the camp. Now the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the sons of the east were lying in the valley, as numerous as locusts, and their camels were without number, as numerous as the sand on the seashore. Now, where have we heard that kind of language before? Yeah. So, like, there's just like a gut punch there, where you're like, we're supposed to be living in the land as numerous as this. We're supposed to have all these blessings and all this stuff, but these guys have it. So there's some irony there. There's some sadness there, even that being recounted that way. So they go down to the camp, and Gideon came, and behold, a man was recounting a dream to his friends. This is verse 13. And he said, behold, I had a dream. A loaf of barley was tumbling into the camp of Midian, and it came to the tent and struck it so that it fell, and turned it upside down so that the tent lay flat. We're like, what did you eat, dude? Yeah, I mean, God works through all sorts of means to help his people. And here he's working through a dream that some random soldier has to bring comfort to Gideon. And the friend answered and interprets this dream, right? And says, this is nothing less than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. God has given Midian and all the camp into his hand. What in the world? Like, how does this guy know this? Like, what is God doing? In one sense, it's a mystery to us. But God is using this to comfort and encourage his servant Gideon. Now it happened that when Gideon heard the account of the dream and its interpretation, he bowed in worship. Then he returned to the camp of Israel and said, arise, for Yahweh has given the camp of Midian into your hands. And this is exactly what Gideon needed to hear. All right, God takes weak people and strengthens them in ways that we might never imagine to be possible. Like, in one sense, this is so much more incredible than a fleece getting wet. Right? This is you going down to the tents of your enemies and hearing them say, no, their God is going to destroy us. Right? That's incredible. And so he takes his 300 men, he divides them into 3 companies, and he put trumpets and empty pitchers into the hands of all of them with torches inside the pitchers. And so what do we have next here? Verses 16 through 24. Weak men, weak weapons, God's tremendous victory. All right, if you're picking weapons to go rout an enemy, trumpets, torches, and jars is just not going to cut it. Right? Anywhere. And yet this is the God that works through these things and these means. And so these 300 men, they copy Gideon. Does God give this plan to Gideon? We don't know exactly. Is Gideon just, in that sense, using his own wisdom in this? Maybe. But God takes this Gideon's plan, this totally absurd battle plan, and uses it to a tremendous victory. And so they're confident in God's plan and action, And they go down, verse 18. And so and all who are with me will blow the trumpet. Then you also shall blow the trumpets all around the camp and say, for Yahweh and for Gideon. Right? So he recognizes, like, this is God's victory. God is doing this. And he throws the and for Gideon there at the end. Like, in one sense, you could go like, maybe that's innocent. Like, that's and I think there's a place where you could say it's innocent. The next chapter makes us think maybe not. But here, right, he's just saying, like, this is, right, God is working through me to deliver this victory. God is delivering this victory. Like, that's what we're going to shout. And so what happens then? So Gideon and his men, they came to the outskirts of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch. So this is the middle of the night, when they just set up the watch. And they blew the trumpets and smashed the pitchers that were in their hands. And then the three companies blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers, and they held the torches in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hands for blowing, and called out, a sword for Yahweh and for Gideon. And the irony is that there are no swords. Right? But this is what they proclaim. And each stood in his place, so they stand still. They're not charging in. They're not kicking these people out. They stand still in their place around the camp. And then all the camp ran, and they made a loud shout and fled. Right? And this is not a small group of people. This is tens of thousands of people. And there's utter chaos. Verse 22, they blew 300 trumpets, and Yahweh set the sword of one against another, even throughout the whole camp. They're taking out themselves. And then they just start to flee. Right? They flee back down this way, through, kind of along the Jordan River, and then they cross somewhere over here, Jordan River, going back east, away from Israel, away from God's promised land. And so they're running, they're crying out wildly, they're fleeing. God's directing all of this chaos. We see that in verse 22 there. And it seems like, as they're running, Gideon starts to call all the people that were sent away, the 10,000, the 22,000. Like, hey, come on, get them. They're running away. We've made them run. Come alongside us. Let's go get them. Now, the problem is this. God did not directly tell Gideon to do that. Okay? Now, maybe it's fine. It's not directly disobedient, but it's also seizing upon more than what God had intended. And so we're starting to see a hint that Gideon, he's going to take things into his own hands a little bit going forward here into chapter 8. And so that's what we have, verses 24 to the beginning of 8:3. It's the question: is Gideon overdependent on one's own strength? Right? Is he all of a sudden transformed from this fearful guy to like this huzzah, I can do everything myself kind of guy? And we're starting to get an inkling that maybe he has done that. He's certainly a good leader. He's directing these people. He sent messengers throughout all the hill country of Ephraim. And so Ephraim is over here on this part of the river and over a little bit over here. And these people, they're starting to spread out and go different places, cross the river. They're getting away. Ephraim was not called to the original battle. Okay? Got to keep that in mind. And so verse 24, Gideon's like, we got to get all these guys. Go get the Ephraim guys. They weren't initially asked, but now they should help us round up these people and capture those princes that are getting away. And so all the men of Ephraim were summoned, and they captured the waters as far as Beth Barah and the Jordan. So basically they're holding the lines there. Verse 25, then they captured, this is Ephraim, the two princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. And they killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and they killed Zeb at the winepress of Zeb. Then they pursued Midian and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon from across the Jordan. So it seems to be like an utter victory. Right? All the guys are coming together, all the different tribes, they're all coming together, they're stomping the Midianites, they're getting them out of there. But Gideon, he's ignored the 300 troop plan. Right? He's brought in a whole bunch of other troops as well. And instead of asking God, right? Should we do this? Should we do this? Is God delivering these people into our hands this way? He just starts doing things. And God, really from this point onward, is absent. From the narrator side of things, God is absent in the direction of what Gideon does from here on through the end of chapter 28. Gideon will say that God's doing things. Gideon will tell people that God said this or God said that. But the narrator no longer gives us the insight that God is directing Gideon this way. And I think that's a pretty big clue that this isn't exactly the direction that God would have it have. And we can see that in the way that Gideon's stuff really starts to fall apart. And so they're getting away. The Ephraimites are helping catch them. But the end of verse 25, it starts to get a little prickly going into chapter 8. And the men of Ephraim said to him, "What is this thing that you have done to us, not calling us when you went to fight against Midian?" And they strongly contended with him. Like, why are they upset? Well, I think they're upset, like, one, you didn't invite us to the battle. And you should have done that. That wasn't cool. Two, they weren't actually involved with, like, the primary route of all the Midianites, right? They were just asked to help with cleanup afterwards. And so that really made it, in one sense, a snub. It's like, we don't really need you for the main thing. Just clean up this little leftover stuff over here, please. And they didn't appreciate that. And we're actually going to see that Ephraim, later on in the book of Judges, is going to be very prickly and very fractious and very willing to go to blows, in one sense, with their brothers. And so this is a hint of what's coming in the book of Judges. And so they go to Gideon, like, why didn't you do this? And Gideon, he's very diplomatic here. But notice that he doesn't give credit to God in these things the same way. He doesn't say, God enabled me to do this, and that's a praise to him, and so we should just be thankful and not fight. He doesn't do that, right? He's pretty diplomatic with this whole situation here. And so he starts by saying, like, what I've done now in comparison with you, like, aren't the grapes of Ephraim better than the harvest of Mizar, my place? Like, he's like, you guys are better than us. We get that. Like, I haven't done anything compared to what you guys have done. You guys are way better at fighting than we are, right? Verse 3, God has given the princes of Midian, of Oreb and Zeb into your hands. What was I able to do in comparison with you? Like, you guys are so strong. You guys did it. Like, why are you guys mad? And that's what happens, right? They aren't angry anymore. Then their anger toward him subsided when he spoke this word. Like, he soothes their feelings, but he doesn't really bring God's role in the whole thing into this. And that's notable. And so going forward, right, Gideon, he's not really crediting God. So this is kind of the opposite of what we have with Deborah or some of these other judges earlier, where they give praise to God, and they're like very, very clear who did all these things when they're telling other people about it. Gideon, he's saying, like, I did my part, you guys did your part, right? That's kind of the way it should be. And even as off-the-cuff reference, verse 3, God's given the princes of Midian, like, that wasn't necessarily God's plan that God gave to Gideon, right? Gideon's just kind of saying stuff here. So what else is this showing, this issue, this flare-up with Ephraim? Well, it's showing that there's crumbling cohesion amongst the tribes in Israel. Like, this is starting to fall apart. Right? They're depending upon their own strength. They're going at each other, even in the successes. All right, so now we're going to end here with this. Failures of godless pursuits. We only have a few minutes here, so we're going to have to kind of rush through chapter 8 here. But I say chapter 8, verse 4 onwards, it's a very big difference from the Gideon that you meet in chapter 6, who's afraid and hiding in a wine press and has to be told multiple times, like, no, you are the one, right? This guy is entirely different. Okay, he's not shrinking back. And he's not even the brave warrior that you see in chapter 7. He now becomes this aggressor, this brutal aggressor even towards his own people. And so that's what we have there, verses 4 through 21, justice in the wrong hands. Right, he starts to do this on his own accord. and it doesn't go well. He's showing, in one sense, that he's not the kind of king that you need. And so they're pursuing these people. Now, did God tell them to go pursue them and hunt them down and end them all? No. Okay, so Gideon, he's doing his own thing here. He's running with his 300. They cross over the Jordan. They're weary, yet pursuing, verse 4. And so they're on the other side over here. There's some water over here. And you have Sukkoth or whatever, and Penuel is right over here. On that side of the Jordan. That's probably not to scale, but that's where they are.
Kyle, to interject, does it matter because they're being driven already out of the promised land?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
because originally they would have had the call to eliminate all the
Yeah.
in the
Like
land.
they're gone. They're out.
But because they left the land.
Yeah, they've left the land, and they've left even their brother's land in Ephraim, where they're about to go seek out help. So they're going away. They're going back east. They're going down home. And Gideon's got this bloodthirst, and he's just going after them. And he's chasing them. And so he goes to his own brothers, right? Those that were in Ephraim that were on the other side of the river. And he's like, hey, like we need supplies. Like we're thirsty, we're hungry. Like give us loaves of bread, verse 5, to the people who are following me, for they are weary. I'm pursuing these kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna. But the princes of Succoth said, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hands, that we should give bread to your army? He's like, they're not here. Like, you guys haven't done that. Like, why do we have to feed you? Basically, he's saying, no, we're not going to do that. And Gideon, he doesn't plead with them. He doesn't say any of that. He says instead, verse 7, thus when Yahweh is given, and he's still thinking, like, God's giving all this to him, right? And in one sense, God does. When Yahweh has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, then I will thrash your bodies with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars. Like his own kinsman. Like it'd be different if this was a Canaanite city, and he was, in one sense, the king coming in and basically demanding, like, no, like I'm your king, and there's consequences if you disobey. But these are his own brothers, right? And so we're getting it, like there should be an off-puttingness to this, that we should be like, oh, that's not good. And so he goes down a little bit to Penuel, and he spoke similarly to them, and they answered him just as the men of Succoth had answered. And so he spoke also to the men of Penuel, saying, when I return safely, I will tear down this tower in your city. Like I'm going to break the city down. And so what happens? Well, he pursues those kings. We'll just kind of skip forward. They flee. He puts them into this fright. They go and they capture them. And they bring back the kings with them. Verse 12. Then Gideon returned from the battle, and he captured a youth from the men of Succoth and questioned him. And so that youth wrote down for him the princes of Succoth and its elders, 77 men. So he basically takes somebody from the city, kidnaps him, says, all right, tell me who all your leaders are so I can go punish them. And that kid does. And he basically comes and gets his vengeance on them. And he takes thorns, briars, verse 16, and he teaches the men of Succoth a lesson. And he goes to Penuel, verse 17, tears down the tower and killed the men of the city. But the judge of Israel, the deliverer of God's people, goes and just kills God's people like this. It's not the king that you should want, not the leader you should want. And then he goes to the kings, and he asks them, verse 18, what kind of men did you kill? And they're like, they look just like you. They were your brothers. And that's what he's like, verse 19, they were my brothers, the sons of my mother, and if you had let them live, I wouldn't kill you, but I'm going to have my son kill you. Now, there's an irony here. How does that son, verse 20, respond to this command? He's afraid. And I think maybe in one sense, like God's putting his Gideon's son in front of Gideon to say, this is who you were. You were afraid. Remember who you were. Remember who you were trusting in. Remember who gave you strength. And I don't think Gideon gets it. But I think it was, in one sense, even a gracious reminder from God to be like, see who you were versus who you are now, and all of your anger and all of your aggression, all of your vengeance. But Gideon, he kills those people. He takes their stuff off of them. And so what do we have now? Verses 23 through 28, not ending strong. All right, so this is kind of the first judge that we really get a glimpse of, like, oh, this doesn't go well at the ends. First of all, the men of Israel, they go to Gideon and they say, rule over us, be the king. Okay, and we were like, yeah, they need a king. Stuff's not going great. They need a king. So on one hand, we can say that. Gideon says to them, I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. Yahweh shall rule over you. And there's multiple ways to take that. And I was going back and forth on it. The nice way to say it is like Gideon's like, no, I can't be the king. God's the king. But another way to take it is like, well, I'm really not your king. God's the king, but yeah, through me, I can do this, right? But God's ultimately the king. And so is he taking on the role of king? Not really, but sort of. Okay, I mean he's going to gather to himself a harem of women. He is going to name his son, which we're going to see next week. His son's name is My Father is the King. So, I mean, it's not subtle. And notably, and that son, too, is also going to try to take control as if he should be because he's the son of a king kind of thing. But notably, Gideon, he starts a religious practice in Israel. Right? So at the same time that there should be people returning to the Lord and worshiping God, Gideon does what? Well, he gathers a whole bunch of gold. Right? He's like, you guys, give me your earrings, give me your stuff, put it all here. Right? That's exactly what the king was not supposed to do. Right? If he's trying to be the king, he's disobeying what the king was supposed to do by doing that. He gathers a harem to himself. Right? The king was not supposed to have wives like that. He's breaking all of these rules that the king was supposed to do. So he's showing that he's not a good king. He's not a good priest king either, in the sense that he then takes all of that gold and makes it into an ephod, right? A priestly garment. And there's some other things there with that. But he takes that garment, he puts it in his city, and what happens with it? Israel played the harlot with it there, so that it became a snare to Gideon and his household. So instead of leading God's people in victory and then in victorious worship and return back to God in true faith, he creates a system of stumbling, of turning away from God, and that becomes a stumbling block for Israel, and ultimately it's probably the main reason why after this period of rest there in verse 28, the land was quiet for 40 years in the days of Gideon. There is now no more rest going through the book of Judges. And it's because this return to idol worship during a period where there should have been no idol worship just shows you where the hearts of Israel are at and basically where they're at with their own judges. And so we have this twisted version of a priest king. And for everyone that's reading your Bibles to know all of this, right, when we get to Hebrews and we have the priest king, right, the true priest, the true king, Jesus, right, he shows us success in everywhere that Gideon fails. And so it doesn't end well with Gideon. And yet, as we're ending here on this note, it doesn't end well with Gideon, and yet God's still gracious. Right? He still gives them 40 years. Gideon is still mentioned in Hebrews, right, for his faith. And so what does that tell us today? I mean, going back to what the main point is today, like God is gracious. Like he is so gracious and he's so loving and kind. Even when we rebel, even when we turn away, even when we're unfaithful, he calls us back, he brings us back. And ultimately, God called Gideon friend and said, yes, like you trusted in me and my promises. I gave you that faith. I brought you into eternal life with me, into eternal rest with me. And so if there's hope for Gideon in that sense coming out of all of that, there's certainly hope for us. And so we need to look to God. He's the only one that can keep us strong to the end. Otherwise, we do all end up like Gideon. And so we need to depend upon him. But let's close in prayer. God, we thank you for your word here tonight for us. As we looked at Gideon and we see his fears, we see his successes, and then we see how he takes his plans, his initiatives into his own hands and his own power, and we see how sin just warps those things. And so, Lord, help us to depend upon you and to not seek out our own ways and our own wisdom and our own desires and follow our own will. Help us to be informed by your will and your word and to live by that. I pray this in your name. Amen.